Hello everyone, and this is chapter 7 or 8. I'm not exactly sure of the number, but whatever. So this is introduction to Houdini and chapter whatever, and we are taking a look at attributes. So this is a fairly important lesson because attributes are a huge part of what makes Houdini extremely flexible. So if you understand this chapter, you'll be able to do a lot more with Houdini than you could do before. Well, you're all beginners in Houdini anyway, so not that you could do a lot with Houdini to begin with, but yeah, this will give you a little more insight into how Houdini functions. Okay, so what exactly are attributes? So an attribute is essentially just a value. Okay, so it's just a value that you store on your geometry. Okay, so it can be stored at primitive level or point level. Different elements can be used to store it, and then you can use that to influence nodes or specific parameters or like a whole bunch of things. And you can not only create your own attributes, but Houdini also creates attributes through simulations and stuff like that, and those can then be used to influence other things. Attributes can also be used to influence shaders. So if particles are generating velocity, then velocity is an attribute, and then you can use velocity to color your shader. Okay, so you can do an n number of things with attributes. Okay, so what we are going to take a look at is attributes at like the most basic level. So because you can just it's like a rabbit hole. You can go down as far as you want. So we won't do that. So we'll just take a look at the basics of it. Okay, so I'm going to start off with a piece of geometry. Let's take a grid. Okay, so we'll just take a grid and I'll jump in here and I'll make it about 5 by 5 and I'll give it 100, or let's make it 50 by 50. Okay, now Houdini has a certain set of pre-existing attributes, and then you can sort of create your own attributes as well. So the most basic one, like if you click, okay, so if you press on this eye over here, which is for information, you'll see that it has something called point attributes and there's something called P. So P is position, and it says 3FLT, which is float. Now the point being, what is a float? Okay, so we have to start from those basics. So I'll just look at the two most basic things, which is what is a float and what is a vector. So float is a single value which has decimal places. Okay, so like 1.0 is a float, or 1.5692 is a float. So generally single values. A vector, which in this case, like position is a vector, okay, but it's also defining it as three floats. So a vector is generally three values. Okay, so they can be in decimal places. So we can have like say 0.1, 2, 3.5. This is a vector. So essentially, like anything that has three values, so position is generally x, y, z. So position is generally x, y, and z. So position is a vector. Or if you look at color, then color is RGB. So color is a vector. But if we extract singular values out of these, so if I take position y, okay, then this is a float because this is just a singular value out of this vector. Or if I take say color red, okay, so this is a float. So these two things you should remember because they are very important. And within Houdini, you also have ways to sort of define these and sort of look at these. So whenever you see, like, it'll define a vector as like a 3 float, so you should know that this is the position contains 3 values. Now, as I said, Houdini gives you a bunch of ready-made attributes. Okay, and if you there are a whole bunch of things that are attributes. Okay, so like even the normals on your geometry are attributes, and you can use those to, affect things if you want. So how do you find out which are the attributes and how to use them? So the most basic way to use them is type Whap, so VOP, and you'll find something called attribute Whap. And this lesson might be like slightly random. Like, I'm just trying to cover a bunch of things, but just to give you an idea, we're not going to use any of this right now, but I'm just showing it to you. So if I connect this, and a Whap is essentially this node contains is a completely different level in and of itself. We'll cover this as we go along. But this is sort of like if you are from a soft image background, then this is ice. Okay, like when we jump inside this you are at ice level. And if you jump in, like just double click and it'll take you to it'll show you something called Vex Builder. So what Whaps essentially is, which is short for Vex operators, is Vex is the scripting language within Houdini. Whaps is a nodal representation of that. Okay, so Whaps is, if you don't want to type Vex code, then you can use Whaps to connect nodes and that will automatically generate Vex code for you. But we're not going to do any of that right now. Okay, so the point is, if I zoom in here, you'll notice that there's something called, this will always be in there. Okay, so there's something called geometry Whap globals, and everything you see here, these are attributes. Okay, and you can use these to influence, if these exist on your geometry, you can use these to influence parameters and nodes. So the way it works is, this is also how you would type it in Vex. Okay, so when you want to type position, you type P. Okay, and capital. Like it is case sensitive, so you have to remember that. Okay, so like if you look at, so CD is color, so it's capital C small d, and then force is force, and V is velocity. Okay, and then whenever you keep your mouse on it, it shows you, see, P is vector. So the light green is vector. Okay, and then this bluish green is a float, and the blue is an integer. Okay, so what exactly is an integer? Integer is a solid value. Okay, meaning no decimal places. So if I look at a float, so 1.0 is a float and 1 is an integer. Okay, so if there are no decimal places, it's an integer. So like if you look here, then you have something called point number, okay, which we had used, which we haven't used. Okay, so if you look at so PT num is point number. Okay, and then point number is because point number will be 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. So this is an integer. Then you have primitive number, which is also an integer. So you have so as we sort of move along and we use more of attributes, and if you sometime don't remember what is the exact syntax, you can come in here and look at this, and this is what you're supposed to type. Okay, anyways, we'll come back up here. I don't need this. Okay, so that's roughly, so forgetting all the rest of the blah blah blah. As I said, an attribute essentially is a value or a set of values that you can generate, okay, or Houdini will generate for you, and then you can use it to influence nodes or parameters or whatever you want. Okay, so yeah, this is just, I've just been talking for a while. We haven't really made anything as yet, but the talking bit is important this time. Okay, now how can you create attributes? Okay, so that's what we're going to take a look at. We're going to take a look at very simply how you can create attributes, and then we'll use that attribute to influence something. So the first thing I'm going to do is we will split this viewport. So I'll click here and I will, click there on top, and we'll say split pane top bottom, and I'm going to right click here and turn it into a geometry spreadsheet. So geometry spreadsheet gives you, shows you attributes. Okay, so right now you have the position attribute, which is technically it is showing you the position value for each point. Okay, so starting from point 0, so point 0, this is the value for it, and then point 1 and point 2, point 3, so on till whatever is the last point, which is 2499. It'll always be 1 less because we start at 0. We don't start at 1. If we started at 1, we would end at 2500 because we are 50 into 50. Okay, so how do we create attributes? Okay, you can close this by clicking here, like that small arrow. Like if you click on the up arrow, it will maximize. If you click on the bottom arrow, it will minimize. So you can create attributes by a node called attribute create. So if you just type in create, you'll get something called attribute create. And we can also create attributes using the basic vex method. And I'll use the vex method because it's just, you might as well get used to it. Eventually you're going to use it a fair bit. So we might as well start using it. So we're going to take a look at a couple of things. We'll take a look at how to make attributes, and then we'll also look at how to sort of transfer attributes from one set to another, something like that. Okay, so I'm just going to connect this here into this, and you can create, the nice thing about the attribute create node is that you can create an n number of attributes. Okay, so if I want to create 10 attributes, I can just click plus 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 and it'll let me create 10 attributes. So what you do is you have to first give it a name, okay, because whatever you type here, whether capital or small, is what you will type if you use it in scripting. Okay, so this is the actual like coding name that you want. So we'll just call it A, like really simple. Then you need to define where it will be stored. Okay, so you want it to be on points or primitives, vertex or detail. Detail we'll talk about later, the rest you can sort of understand. I honestly don't fully understand the difference between point and vertex. I know, shocking. But yeah, most of the times you work on point. Vertex comes into play when you're doing like UVs and stuff, but default you want to work with points. Okay, and primitives is faces, but primitives can be other things too. But yeah, so we're working with points. Okay, so we want it to be stored on each point, and you can like forget precision, that's not important. And then you can define a size for it, which is if it's going to be a single value, then we just keep it to a size of 1. Like if you look at the position, then it says 3, right? So that is like if you want to define a vector, then you take this to 3. Okay, maximum you can go is to 4, which is like a quaternion. But like if you want to do like 3 values, like your attribute should be like 3 floats, then you can define 3 values. If you want it to be like 2 values, because if you like defining UVs, then UV is 2 values, then you can do 2 values. We just want to define 1, so we'll define it to 1. And then forget the defaults, we don't want to do anything here. Since we're defining just one value, it's just these 2 guys matter. The rest of them are not important. And you can set a value right now if you want, but we won't do that right now. We'll do it later. Now, if you open up, see, you can immediately see you have something called A. Like if I come up to the grid, there's A doesn't exist. And then if we come to attribute, you'll see that you have A. And there's no value defined, like it's on each point. So it's all 0, 0, 0 for every point. Now here's the fun part, right? If I change this to primitive, you'll see that it disappears from here. Now you have to come to primitive. Okay, like so this is point, this is vertex, and then this is primitives, and that's detail. Okay, so if you come to primitive, see now you have one attribute here called A. And even if you click on information, it will show you like you have P is a point attribute, so that will always remain there. And then you have in primitives, you have an attribute called A. We don't want it on primitives. Now it is important where you describe it. Okay, because like class is important. Because if you're doing something like say polyextrude and you want like polyextrude to use an attribute, then you can only extrude faces, right? So it has, that attribute will have to be at face level. It can't be at point level because polyextrude won't be able to read it. So depending on where you're using it, you have to define the attribute at that particular level. For now, we're happy with points because we want to use it for points. So yeah, that's good. We can do this. You can also, now we can also set it, as I said, we can set it using another method, okay, which is, I can take something called as a Wrangle node. And we have, now here's the thing, right? You get attribute wrangle, forget height field wrangle and deformation, those are different. But, or actually all of them, right? So height field, point, primitive, vertex, volume, they're all essentially variations of the attribute wrangle. Like if you take the attribute wrangle, by default it works on points. But if I take like a primitive wrangle, you'll notice, hold on a second. Yeah, if I take a primitive wrangle, you'll notice that they look exactly the same. The only difference is that it just changed from points to primitives. which you can do yourself. So usually just take attribute wrangle and change it to whatever you want. So we'll change it to points, and here you can start typing in code. Okay, now after you see this lesson, if you want to look at my intro to Vex lesson, you can, because it will just go a little deeper and you'll get a little more stuff out of it. But yeah, it'll help. Now what we're going to do is I'm going to look at like really specific stuff. So I'm not going to go through the entire syntax and what everything needs to be done, but I'll just do something really, really basic. So if I come, so what is the syntax for typing? If you know a little bit of coding, that's great. You won't have to worry about this. But the way it works is you define whatever attribute you want. Okay, so, or you basically, call in that attribute. So we want to define A, and A is going to be a float. So the way it works is the attribute is always defined by an @ sign and then the name of the attribute. Okay, so this is, and then you have to, before the @ sign, you have to define what it is. Okay, so is it a float? Is it a vector? Is it an integer? So if it's a float, it will be f at A. If it's a vector, it will be v at A. If it's an integer, it will be I at A. So depending on what you want to do. And then we define the value for it. So we'll say equal to 0. And then when you're scripting, you always end it with a semicolon. Okay, so this is very, very important. If you don't type a semicolon, the code will not work. Okay, so this is important. Okay, so that's what we're going to do. So we're just going to come in here. Now, if it's an existing attribute, like if it's position already exists, then you don't need to type the F or the V, because it already exists. Okay, this is the first time, like when you're defining it for the first time, you have to put in, even if you do put in for existing stuff, it won't matter. It's fine, but it's optional. Okay, it's just the first time when you define it, you have to type it. So we're going to do f at A equal to 0 and semicolon. Connected, we didn't connect it, but there you go. Like if we come here, you've done the same thing. You defined the attribute. Okay, we can get rid of this. Okay, see, so we have an attribute called A. Now you can set attributes through groups as well. Meaning, like if I want a certain section of this to have like we want to modify the A value for like just a section of this, then we can use groups. Okay, so let's say if we take a group, because see, you can see here like it has the option to modify groups. So if I take a group here and I will say select points, and what I'm going to do is I'll use keep in bounding region. So it gives you like a bounding box. Okay, so I'm just going to make this big, and then yeah, I'll just call it group 1. That's fine. And then we'll take another wrangle and we'll set it to group 1, and now we can modify A. So I'm just going to say at A, because A already exists, is equal to, let's say 0.2 and semicolon, and just click outside. Now if we look at this, we should be able to see it. Like if I move the mouse somewhere, see, there you go. Like you have see, those guys were at 0.2 somewhere in there. See, there you go. These guys are at 0.2. Okay, so once you have defined this, now let's say we want to use it somewhere. Okay, so one of the very simple ways to visualize an attribute is you can take a color node. Okay, so if you take a color node, and then within the color node, you have this option where I can just change the color type to ramp from attribute. Okay, and then I can type in the name of the attribute. So if I type A, and there you go. So we had defined the second attribute at a value of 0.2. So it's just setting up a grayscale gradient going from like black to white, but it's just picking up this. So if I take, it's picking up a value. So it's not going all the way to 1 because this value was set at 0.2. If I set this to 0.2, then it will give me, see, then that goes to white. But it's picking up a range from 0 to 1. So this stops at 0.2, so it stops there. But let's say if I take this up to 1, then see, that becomes bright. And then the fun thing is if I move this around, you see that you can change, you're modifying, attribute values. So that's a very, very, simple way to do it. You can also smoothen it out if you want. like let me just come to the group and I'll make it smaller. And let's say if I type in smooth, so you get something called smooth. And then within smooth, it has the option to pick up attributes. So now you can start noticing like there's a lot of stuff that can directly use attributes. So by default, it smooths out, it'll smooth position, but we don't want it to smooth position. We want it to smooth A. And then if I drop it in the middle, see, now you can notice that it is smoothing out A. Like if I increase the strength of this and maybe like lower the filter quality. Yeah. But anyway, so that being, what you can do with it. Like if I come back to the group and move it around, you can see that, you can adjust this. Or if I change this to like a bounding sphere, then you're getting a sphere. See, so you can do stuff like that. Okay, so this is really basic. Now, what can we do with this, beyond that is, let's say if I want to use the A attribute to modify my position. Like I want to move the points up wherever, whatever A value I have given, then I can again use a wrangle to do that. Okay, so I can take a wrangle and I want to modify the Y position. Okay, so you can notice here it says Px, Py, Pz. We want to modify Py. Okay, so the way it works is you type in at capital P dot Y. Okay, so the dot gives you the ability to extract singular values out of vectors, and equal to will be at A. Okay, so we're just saying like whatever value is in A, let that feed into position Y, and then semicolon, and if you click here, see, there you go. And now if I move this around, you'll see that you are adjusting based on that. And if I increase the smooth value to say about 900, there you go. Yeah, so you can do stuff like that. Now you can also, like, this is a pretty this is a decent way to do it, but you can also paint attributes values. Okay, so now that we have defined an attribute called A, I can use like a paint node to further modify it. So let me just come to the grid and let's keep it to 50 by 50. What I'll do is I'll get rid of the middle stuff. Like I'll leave the attribute wrangle, I'll get rid of like that much. Okay. And in the middle, I can take a paint node. So a paint node is not procedural because you're actually painting on geometry, which means if I change the vertex count later, or if I change the segment count later, the paint node will screw up. So yeah, but it is still useful. Okay, so if I just take this and I want to paint, like by default it will paint color, but you can say override color and paint A. And it will immediately change color because it has an ability to visualize the attribute. Okay, so I'll just paint in, I don't know, let's say if we can paint in something like an octopus. Okay, my octopus is 5 tentacles because you can't see the rest, and a little bit bigger. It is pressure sensitive, so if you have like a pen, because I'm painting with a pen, so you can use that. And then we can also smoothen it out if a little bit. So if you want, I can I can smoothen it out. Okay, that's more like a hand, but we're going to look at it this way. So this is not a hand. It's an octopus. Okay, so we've done that. This is cool. And now if I come back to the attribute wrangle, which was using the position Y, see, there you go. We just did this. Okay. And you can do some basic things here because now the painted value is going all the way to 1. I can do a multiplication here. So I can say multiply by 0.3 or 0.3. And there you go. See, so I can define it this way. And then I could probably put like a subdivide in the middle, like after the paint node. So you get like a little more detail over there. And if I come back to the paint node and I make changes, like if I say erase changes and if I remove some stuff, see. So you can do, stuff like that. Like, let me just, yeah, so you can do, things like these. Now, we can also use this to keep it fairly simple. We can also use this to define or modify copies. Now, I'm going to use the copy stamp again. There is another way to use it to influence copies, but I don't want to get to that level as yet. So what I can do is, like, after the subdivide, let's say if I take a box and I'll just take a copy stamp and let's connect it. And let's just make this really small. So I'm going to take this and make it like 0.1 and then maybe smaller still using the uniform scale. And then what you can do is, if you come to the copy stamp and turn off transform cumulative, otherwise it doesn't work. It also shows you like a guide of whatever is the incoming geometry. I don't like seeing that, like that blue stuff that you're seeing, that's irritating. So yeah, so just connect it to a null and that will be fine. Okay, let's close this now, we don't need it. So what you can do is just come in here and I want to modify the uniform scale, okay, using the attribute that we have defined. So just come to uniform scale and type @a, and there you go. So what it is doing is, whatever value is stored in A, it's using that to scale my boxes. Okay, so if I just come in here and I start to, like, paint a little bit more, and you can go above A, above 1 as well. Like by default, it does not, like, it just says replace. You can tell it to add. Okay, so with add, I can actually start going over. See, now I'm going over a value of 1. Like maybe if I, along with the uniform scale, I also wanted to affect the y-axis, then I can come to the scale in y and I can type @a over there as well. See, so you'll notice, like, okay, not, yeah, it's stretching it sideways. It's the whole rotation issue again. Just delete channel. Come into transform. Like put a transform here and rotate it 90 as we had done once before. Okay, let's try @a now. Scale y @a. Yeah, no. Okay, hold on a second. Delete channel, keep this to 1. Let's try it in, okay, do it in the Z axis. Yeah, there you go. Yeah, this part is, I don't know why it does that, but there you go. See, now that looks interesting. Okay. So whatever I paint now, it's actually like, so if you want to build like cityscapes and stuff like that, see, this is like very, very easy to do that. I can smooth a few of the changes if I want. Like if you don't want it to affect the uniform scale and it should only affect the Y, then delete it from there. So like just delete channel and keep this to 1. So you'll just see like tall boxes. We'll need more value now. Or what you can do is you can multiply here. I can say multiply by 5, see, or let's say multiply by 10. Yeah. So now you're seeing like it only influence in the y-axis. So you can do a fair few things with this. Okay, you can also do something interesting, like if you only want the points to be generated at this level, you can also delete points based on attribute. Okay, but we won't get to that, but you can, like, it's not very complicated. But let's say if I want to have points only where the attribute is painted, then after the subdivide, I can take a scatter node. So a scatter node just scatters points. Like if you're from a max background and you have done multi-scatter, think of this as very base level multi-scatter. Like you're actually building your own multi-scatter. That's what you're doing. So I can define number of points. But what I can do is I can say density attribute will be A. And there you go. See. So now it is defining density using that one attribute. And if that feeds into copy, yeah, now it will work in y-axis. So delete this channel, bring it to 1. Once the geometry goes away and if you only have like points left, then it works in y-axis. Otherwise the normals cause an issue. So @a into 10. Yeah, there you go. See. So now wherever I paint is where I will see my points appearing. Yeah, let's do it for uniform scale as well. That was nice. So let's keep this to about 2 and we'll do @a over here as well. Yeah. And so if I come into the paint and I start to paint here, see, now you're generating more points as it goes along. If I want, I can erase changes. So if I don't want something in some place, I can actually like delete certain areas. So if you want to create like an island which has like trees and stuff, you can do stuff like that, which is interesting. Or if I come, like if I do this, right, because this is my deforming geometry, let's try multiply by 0.2. Okay. 0.1. Yeah. And if I feed this into scatter, then what's going to happen is like your entire geometry, see now you're actually like moving up. So if I take this attribute triangle and I multiply it by 0.3, you're actually like moving up the geometry. So this is kind of like very base level displacement. But yeah, we can bypass that if we don't want it. Yeah, I'm going to delete that, keep it to 1. Yeah. Yeah, so you can do a lot of stuff like that. You can also use the color attribute. Like we can use this to influence color and then paint using that. Okay, so if I just come in here and if we look at the paint, yeah. So what we can do is I can use like a color node. And if I do the same thing again, if I say ramp from attribute A, see, so this is what we've painted. And let's say if I adjust this a little, so I'll make it like red, green, blue. So I'll make this red with a little bit of like pure green over here. And then the end becomes blue. Yeah, is this pure green? Yeah, I think so. Okay, no. Yeah, that's pure green. And this should be pure blue. Okay, so we have like red, green, blue over here. And let's get rid of the scatter temporarily. So what we have is like this. Now here's the fun part, right? So if I come into copy and then instead of A, now I can start using like, because now we've defined color and let's feed the color in here. So you'll notice that you not only have like, you have A, which is a float, which is influencing color, which is 3 floats. And then you have your position. So within the color, since we defined like 3 separate, color values here for our gradient, I can use any one of these to influence my, my copies. So if I come in here and if I do like at cd.r, so which is we're using the red color, then you're getting this. And if I say at cd.green, then you're influencing that. And then if I say at cd.blue, then you have everything on the outside. Okay, so you can do like very interesting things with this. So if I do like this, and then if I come into the color and see, I can sort of like, move it out a little bit, or I can adjust it a little bit more. We can even define a range for this. So you can do some pretty fancy stuff with it then. We can't animate this right now. I'll show you in the next video of how you can animate these things as well. Okay, like if you do all of this through the group instead of the paint, then we could actually animate it. Okay, like if I come in here just to sort of show you, and okay, let's say if I bypass the paint and I use the group thing again. So I'll do a group and we'll say group points by bounding box sphere, and take another attribute triangle. This will be group 1. We'll say at A is equal to 2. Okay. And then we'll also use a smooth to smoothen out the A value. I'll keep it to about 700. So what this should do is if we plug it in here, I should just get like a sphere. See, I just have this. Okay. And then if I plug this into null, and then if I start to move this around, you'll see, interesting stuff happening. Like if I move this around, so now I'm moving my, my copies. See, so you can do, stuff like that. And you can animate this, like you can just, animate these values. So if I just do like an alt click here, and if I come ahead and I move it across somewhere, see, so you've actually like defined your, and if I just activate the scatter again, see, there you go. So now you actually have like the copies, moving across your geometry, and all of it through just one single attribute. Okay, and then if I change this color value to or if I just come back to my copy and I say CB, then see, there you go. That's what you're getting. Or if I do like CR, See, so then we're getting the inside value. Yeah, so that's basically it. Okay, so as I said, an attribute essentially is just a value that you can store on points, primitives, vertices, or detail, and then you can use that to influence nodes or parameters in other nodes. So that's basically it. So I'm hoping, as usual, this was clear. As I said, this is a fairly important lesson. Like once you understand what attributes is, and we've defined one attribute. You can define as many. Okay, like if I come in here and let's say if I do the y-axis thing again, and I can do like at cd.g into 5. See, so those are all standing up. Let's try 10. Yeah, but let's say if I also wanted to rotate, okay, I can actually define a second attribute for rotation and use that. Okay, so I can actually do like a wrangle, or let's say we want to use like the blue color for rotation. Okay, so I can come into, let's try, yeah, the y-axis, or sorry, the rotation x-axis, and I can do at cd.r for rotation into 90. So whatever is towards the center, see, you're getting like a little bit of rotation there. Let's make it 180. Yeah, see. So now as you start to move it out, so you will see that the rotation sort of takes place. Or if we use like the G color itself, see. And then if I come to the color value and adjust it, you'll see the rotation kind of change. Or if I move this a little bit towards red, you'll see the rotation kind of go away. See, now it's not rotating as much because the green value is getting lesser. So you can define multiple, like we defined just A, but you want to do like A, B, C, and each one can have different values, and you can have each one influence, like one can influence scale and one can influence rotation and one can influence position. You can do, anything like that. So, experiment, play around, you'll figure out what to do with it. Yeah, so that's basically it. So as usual, I'm hoping this is clear, and we will keep using attributes more and more in the upcoming lessons, and hopefully things will get more clear as we go along. But as usual, if you have any questions regarding this lesson or anything else in general, feel free to write me an email, or you can ask on YouTube, you can ask on Vimeo, wherever I post this video, and I'll help you out to the best of my abilities. And that's basically it.